So one of the areas that we're talking about, and this is kind of an industry conversation and a lot of things going on, is around product and like product strategy, how you're packaging stuff, how you're putting that out to your audience. And that's like another whole layer of jobs in the industry. So who are the people, basically becoming the people that say, okay, you have this content, let's package it in a newsletter, and that newsletter we can go to this place and get a sponsorship. We can do this thing to get subscribers, like thinking about all the pieces and how it all comes together to improve on both the business side and get the content out to the right audience.
Welcome to the News Nirvana podcast. I'm your host, Nick Parker. The News Nirvana podcast features conversations with media professionals from across the country, highlighting our ever-evolving business models and showcasing the strong and effective journalism produced each and every day. This podcast is made possible to you by the generosity of Blocks Digital. Blocks Digital empowers content producers to connect with their worldwide audiences at scale and continuously transform to achieve their business goals. Contact Blocks Digital today to learn more about how they can help you thrive. Connect with them at blocksdigital.com. Hello and welcome back to the News Nirvana podcast. I'm your host, Nick Parker. This week, this is a fun for me because I grew up in Missouri, and there's always nothing better than talking about the Missouri School of Journalism. It's the peak. It's the one we all strove to. I, of course, did not go to Mizzou, so that's on me. With me today, Elizabeth Stevens, Associate Professor and Executive Editor for the Columbia Missourian. She's also the Missouri Community Newspaper Management Chair, and she's a graduate of the Missouri School of Journalism. So she went home for her career. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
This is fun. I always like when we get to talk about training the next generation, about getting them ready and what the future of our industry is going to be. That's kind of, I think the point of this show a lot is to talk about where we're at now and what the changes are, and how we're adjusting, because the news world is different than it was when I first got in the mid 90s or so, and even I'm sure in the last 20 years as you've been through things after getting your degree there at Mizzou. This is the third interview we've had on this show about student journalists. So I'm excited to get back to it. Actually, it's the fourth. I apologize. I'm excited to kind of get back into that and talk about what you're doing with these student journalists and how you're getting them ready and prepared to jump into the world. So can you let's just start with what's different now. You graduated early 2000s, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's different now in the Mizzou program than maybe it was in the last 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say the fundamentals are still there. Like every student that comes through here needs to know how to report. They need to know how to write. And so those foundational things are still underlying the entire curriculum. But it has evolved. We've changed the curriculum couple times since I graduated. When I came through, the emphasis area was news editorial. And the internet was still like, what is this going to be? And
by the way, as an industry, we were wrong the whole time.
Yes. As I was graduating, they started a convergence track trying to get on and figure out what this will be. And when I came back in 2011, then clearly we were full in on digital, but still learning and growing in that space. So the news editorial emphasis area became print and digital. And now it's reporting and writing, because the platform is kind of agnostic. And so we do still have a print edition, though. So we are still printing a newspaper 5 days a week. We have a monthly magazine that's in print, but the students are thinking much more about writing for the website, and that's we're on a constant deadline. So there's no just end of the day, everything gets pushed to the web at some point, but it's web first always. We also have grown our like audience path. So when I came back in 2011, then one of my colleagues was just starting to kind of experiment and figure out what else can we be doing just besides posting story links to Twitter at the time, or Facebook? What is the engagement that we can have with our audience, and who else can we reach there? And so she started kind of a class to explore that and expand that. And that has grown into a whole path for students that they can focus on audience strategy for newsrooms. And there's a definitely a market for that for jobs. They are very much in need. So that's a space where I feel like the curriculum really has shifted. We also have students that are kind of learning editing and producing across multiple platforms, whether that's editing and producing for web, or doing stuff for audio, whether that's a podcast or radio. So we have a radio station as well. And then, of course, TV producers are always in high demand as well. So all of that's kind of, it's been a lot in the, I graduated in 2005, and it's been a big change in 20 years that we've kind of seen play out and continue to evolve. There's always things that we're kind of adjusting and adapting for.
I like what you said earlier there about writing and reporting, that the news is agnostic. It doesn't really matter. I think that's an important one, because we're always talking about everything's new, everything's changing, we have to do things differently. But in a sense, that one simple premise at the beginning of how to report the news and how to write is key to everything. Like
It
I think
is,
it's easy to forget
yeah.
the basic.
And what I hear from newsroom leaders in the industry is I can teach them the software, I can teach them the tools that we're using, but if they don't have that fundamental reporting and writing and news judgment, then that stuff I don't have time to teach, or is not necessarily teachable. So those are things that we like really hone in on, of this is where you start. Because, and the other thing is critical thinking is a big piece of it, because I mean, it's changed in the 14 years I've been back, and I will show students, I'm like, I don't know, let's Google it, let's figure out how we do this thing you want to try, and show them that yeah, we're all learning and we're all figuring it out, and it's okay to do that. But you've just got to understand what your goal is and what you're trying to achieve with something, and then go figure out what might work and test it and try it. I mean, that's one of the cool things about how we operate, is that we are both a lab for students learning how to do journalism, but we also want to be experimenting and be an example for the industry and test different ideas and things that other newspapers, websites, digital, distribution are also experimenting with, and want to see how it's working.
Yeah, I like that, and then it all starts with the like you said, the news judgment, the critical
Hmm.
thinking, and how to report, but also experimenting with those tools is cool. And I'm going to use the example of one of my first jobs. Actually, it was an internship while I was in college. I went up to a paper for a community journalism class, and they had just started pagination.
Mm,
And so as an intern, I actually ended up teaching these veteran pros this is how you do it digitally, because they were still sending it out and running it through a waxer and piecing together uh,
yeah,
the pages. And here it was, oh wait, no, you can do it, because at school, the schools had the money to get all this stuff, and
yeah.
we were a little bit ahead. That was interesting and strange at the same time.
I teach a community journalism class, and we visit newsrooms around the state of Missouri. And we went to one, and they still had paste up pages.
Oh, wow.
Um, they had only switched in like 2021 to
Wow.
doing, yeah. So it was like, And so the last issue that they had pasted up was still on their pasteboards and sitting there. But they said they had like the camera broke, like something went down, and they just had to immediately switch with very little like chance to train and transition. And they just did it. They just figured it out. But yeah, it was kind of fascinating. My students were like, "What?"
Probably kind of cool though to see
Yeah,
how we
it is.
put it all
Yeah.
together. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of fun. That experimentation and stuff that you were talking about, what does that lead to new opportunities as they graduate and move on because they've been able to experiment with new tools, or as I
I
call them, new
think
toys?
so. I think obviously they leave here with a full portfolio of clips, range of things that they have done, regardless of what role they are pursuing. But I think the more they can show where they did experiment, how they did something differently, thought outside the box, then that certainly gives them a way in, and it gives them something to talk about that's different than just, yes, I covered school board for 6 months or whatever it was. But like, one of the cool things we did this spring was kind of a new experiment around elections and how we shared candidate views on different issues. So we had a grid online that you could filter, you could sort it, you could look at it different ways, and kind of see and compare answers. Like, how does this person feel about whatever the issues were in the school board race or the city council races and stuff. And so that's something that our student like took ownership of and did. And so now she can show it and say, this is something I tried. This is what I learned. This is what I would do differently. And this is what I would want to try maybe in your newsroom if she was, taking a job somewhere else.
That's a neat tool to show a
Mm-hmm.
filterable
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
grid out there. And I think newsrooms everywhere are trying to figure out how best to cover local elections. I think,
Mm-hmm.
the cliche is it's never been more important. And unfortunately, I think that cliche is getting pretty true.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think we're all looking for new tools, new ways to inform voters, to make sure that the information is getting out there so that we know who those candidates are, know what those issues are. And that's a place like your school is a great way to figure out those tools and to find new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we just found that we were covering these, forums and stuff. And it was like, when you're trying to kind of condense it into a narrative, you get like two quotes from each candidate and that's it. And so you don't even hear all the responses. And so it's a lot of work, no question, that you're trying to, transcribe this stuff. I mean, we did try to prioritize kind of some key issues, but it really did make a difference. Like, you could really go in and look and see how do the candidates compare on special education? What do they think that needs to happen to support teachers and retain teachers, that kind of stuff. So you could really narrow it. And there were various questions, that detailed those even more. So it was really an experiment that I think was successful. There's always things that will improve and change going forward. But yeah, it's that kind of thing that students get to try. I mean, if the student had been willing to try this and experiment, then it wouldn't have worked. Like, we needed their buy-in to it, but they thought of things I hadn't thought of. We really brainstormed various ways to approach some of the challenges along the way, and that made a big difference.
That's awesome. And such a great way too to learn how to get beyond the initial questions, because
Mm-hmm.
we'll keep using the school board as the example. Every candidate's going to say they support the teachers, right? But what does that
Yeah.
mean? Right,
Right.
to really
Right.
dig in and let voters know what that means to that candidate, or if they
Mm-hmm.
can answer beyond that.
Yeah. Exactly.
What is, I guess this goes back to your critical thinking part of it, as you're training them, how are you working with them to learn how to do that, to learn to dig farther than those initial things?
It's a constant coaching and conversation and looking at examples and like kind of what is the vision, and how close can we get? And that was a lot of the conversations we had, particularly with this reporter, of like, here's the end goal. What are the things we need to do to get there? So if you go to this interview and they answer this, you've got to, if they say this, then you've got to push, you've got to keep asking, and you've got to do your research, and you've got to go in well informed. And I think that was something this reporter did really well, is she knew the issues so well and could not just accept the answer at face value, but say, okay, but the school board has done this, so how would you take that farther, or what would you change about that policy, or whatever the case may be.
Learning that balance, to be prepared, but learning that balance of how to allow yourself curiosity too, I think is such a great and difficult skill for reporters to learn. And they kind of have to find their own way, what works for them and their brain, right? And how they do it. There's a podcast series Jesse Thorne did called The Turnaround, where he interviewed interviewers about how they did their job. And I think it was like a 12-part series or something, but it was really good. And it helped me as I first started podcasting. Mm-hmm. It's a different style of interviewing than as an old paper reporter. But I think, there are some that, like, Jon Stewart, right, from The Daily Show, is famous for, he knows everything about you before you come to his show. He's read everything you've ever said, you've ever written, and he knows. And then I think it was the Larry King interview where he was like, yeah, I don't want to know anything. He's like, I'm going to know who you are, but he wanted to leave his head open for curiosity. And I think, like, that was interesting to me here to hear the two styles, but then also to realize, oh, this is where I lie in that spectrum a little bit, and how I prepare. And I think that's really hard for reporters as they're starting out to learn their thing.
Yeah. I mean, and the great challenge we have, of course, is the lack of institutional knowledge for our students, right? So I have 10 faculty members that are the editors. They are working with the students. They have been here. They're invested in our community. They know all the background of things. But then you bring in these students that are juniors, so they've lived in town for 2.5 years, and they think that everything is new, like that they are the first ones to discover these issues in our community. And it's like, no, we've been reporting on that for a while. And so that, like, because there is a bit of source fatigue in that, of like, there are a lot of journalists here, there's a lot of conversation. I mean, there's a lot of like interviewing that they have to do and that kind of thing. So we try really hard to push, like, you have to read ahead, you have to like go back and see how we have reported on this. We're now more than a year into this, but I don't know, I think it goes back to, the debate went back to maybe even 2008 about our trash service in Columbia, of whether, like, we used to just like put bags on the curb, and like, you literally weren't allowed to push a trash can out to the street. And so there's been much debate over whether we have roll carts or not. And I'm not kidding, this went on since 2008. There was like a petition that went to voters. There was like city council debates every year, and these students would come in and they'd be like, why are there trash bags on the side of the road? Like, what is this thing that happens with trash in Columbia? Every time it was like, it was a new thing. And I'm like, no, this is a long-term thing. But we did finally, the city council implemented roll carts, and then it's been silent. Like, it's not even a story anymore, because everybody's fine with it after much angst over it. But I remember
the weirdest fights.
Yes, but it's like, but basically students come in and they just don't know what's happened in this community. Now, sometimes the fresh lens is great. They see things that I don't see because they have fresh eyes and stuff. But there are a lot of things in our community that are like, oh no, you've got to go back and read all of the things before you go talk to anybody about this, because you don't want to look like you don't know what's going on here. And if you act like trash on the side of the road is a new thing, then they're just going to dismiss you right away.
That's a great lesson, though, because it's going to happen again when they graduate.
Yeah. Right.
And
yes,
they go to a new, whether it's at a metro paper, whether it's at a metro station or a smaller community organization, they're going to be newbies again.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we're kind of industry known that the old people treat the new people a little mean. I feel like that's pretty common everywhere, but you're going to be the newbie again. So I think that's a great lesson to learn, that like you've got to go back into the archives sometimes too, and make
Yeah.
sure you're prepared for those community issues that may have been going for years.
And it's a good lesson of like when they get to their first job, like here are things you need to do to like get acquainted with the community and get to know it. I mean, even as freshmen when they're in those early classes, like their news quizzes and stuff are about things that are very local to Columbia. Like, yes, you should know what's happening in the world, but like you've got to be reading what's happening in Columbia, because that's going to be what you do for the next 4 years, is invest and focus on what's happening in this community.
Yeah, I had a publisher. One of my first jobs, one of the first things he did was walk me back to the warehouse and show me where the bound volumes were for the archives, and encouraged me, go read stuff.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
We've been around for a couple hundred years. Go read
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Be curious about where you're living and covering now. And I just, that was a lesson that I've always remembered
Mm-hmm.
about starting out. I want to switch gears a little bit because you said something interesting really early on. And you talked about how you and your students are using and engaging the audience through social media, that you've learned now to go past just posting links, which I think is how
Mm-hmm.
we all started and got on. So how are you approaching social media now, and how are you teaching them to engage their audiences? Because you really can't just post links anymore. It doesn't work.
Yeah. So a few things. One is like platforms change. And there's platforms that make sense to invest time into, and there's platforms that we automate and say those exist, but not our priority. So one platform we really leaned into heavily is Instagram, and doing more videos, more reels, more stories that have some engagement opportunities, thinking about how people share feed posts and stuff. So we've got more integrating like the story in the feed post. So you get a headline, you also get some text and maybe some quotes from the story as you're kind of scrolling through photos. It's no longer just a show pretty photos kind of platform. It is a way that people consume news now, and they aren't leaving that platform. So how do you kind of get them engaged, consuming the content, maybe sharing it? We are having our reporters be out there more. So they, especially for sports, when we're sending them out to an event, they're traveling for something, we got to send reporters to both the NFL Combine and the NFL Draft this year. So they do some videos from those places. So you see their faces, you kind of get some back and forth. People can ask their questions. So there's some things that we can do to just have more of a face out there. But we're also experimenting and looking at things like Reddit, how people are engaging there, where it might make sense to jump in and have a conversation or ask some questions in that space. We're experimenting with Nextdoor and what role news has in that, and how we might reach those very local audiences in that platform.
I'm curious
Um,
what you think of Nextdoor, because here's really all I know about Nextdoor. It is almost impossible to unsubscribe.
yeah, right. It's very early for us. This is a pretty new thing that we got an invitation to, so we're just starting to like mostly listen, see what's being talked about, see where we might be able to insert or not. We don't want to just like flood feeds or contribute to your email flood or whatever, but um, what one, can we listen, can we identify story ideas out of there, and two, are there things that we can just share facts on, that if there's a conversation that we might be able to share a story that's like, okay, yeah, we did look into this is what happened. So that's something we're early stages on for sure.
The News Nirvana podcast is made possible by the generosity of Blocks Digital. Blocks Digital empowers content producers to connect with their worldwide audiences at scale and continuously transform to achieve their business goals. Contact Blocks Digital today to learn more about how they can help you thrive. Connect with them at blocksdigital.com. I think you just mentioned that the story mining aspect of it from social media. It's an interesting topic to me because, and I'm curious what you're seeing over the last few years. What I saw early on, so my local news organization is, what am I, 9 years old? That's hard. So fairly new, right? What I have found is sometimes as I'm scrolling through different social media platforms, what I think might be a story coming out of it, it turns out is actually a pretty small but loud group of people. And it's not always a reflection of what the community conversation is. And so sometimes it's difficult to look through those and find to recognize what's a real community story and conversation and what's just a few really loud people.
Yes, for sure. We definitely see that too. And so, you have to kind of like, okay, yes, this is interesting, but like, who does it matter to? And, what is the actual issue? And are there things that aren't kind of clear from this? So, there's some interesting Facebook groups that I follow and kind of tap into. And like you said, I really do think I balance that with the community relationships that I have to see how much am I hearing it in both places and how much is just a loud minority on Facebook kind of blasting here. And that's not the conversation I'm having in real life. And so those are things that we try to suss out to some extent. But like there has been a lot of discussion and there is some validity to it as well. We've had 3 teens killed in homicides since January, which is not normal for Columbia. And so there's just things like crime is definitely a topic that comes up. And so it's very much like, yes, we can look at the numbers, but we also recognize that there is some fear, there is some concern in the community that just spouting numbers saying, oh yeah, it's down compared to this doesn't necessarily like answer all the questions and all the concerns from community members. So it's a mixture of things. Like you've got to look at all the sides of what's going on and what's being talked about in that space as well.
I think that that circles back to the original thing we were talking about, which is preparation and putting news judgment to figure out what's what and the context behind it. Because I think you're right. Giving just the numbers doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, as with everything, context is everything, right?
Right.
To put that all together.
Yes.
Kind of in relation to that, how are you using data? You said you're trying to lean into engagement on that and what and where, what news and where to put it. How are you looking at data, what you're getting from your audience numbers to really kind of help you learn not only what to report on, but where to put those different things?
Sure. So I always
it's a hard question to answer because there's so much number.
And I'm always warning students, like I don't want them to obsess over page view numbers by any means. And I also am constantly reminding people we have to balance, like you got to compare apples to apples. Like a city council story is never going to perform as well as a Mizzou football story. It's just not. But you can look at this city council story versus this city council story, and there was much more engagement on this one and not this one. Well, how are the posts written? How did it get shared? What was the comments? What was the topic that was kind of foremost in the headline? Like, what did we kind of focus on? And how could we improve the next time or something? So we're looking at those things. We also look at, I will say that I was just talking to students this week about kind of how it's flipped. So I would say 10 years ago, our traffic was very heavily social media. And now it is very heavily search. So we are definitely training and teaching around SEO and how to make the, best use of headlines, thinking about how people are getting to us via search. But we
I feel like
also,
every news organization everywhere could have that kind of training.
oh yeah, for sure. And they're doing it. They are. And that's something that's important for students to understand and at least get the foundation of as well so that they can go in prepared to do that. And then but we also have ways in our analytics to narrow down and look at just Columbia readers. So like we get a lot of people from all over reading, Mizzou fans from all over can read our stuff, which is great. Um, and then something will go viral for who knows why. And that's great too. But at the end of the day, I want to know, what are my Columbia readers wanting? And you suddenly see the top 10 list flip, right? And it's suddenly that city council thing. It is the, restaurant opening. It's very local things that they care about. And so those are the things that we continue to just look back as it's kind of the North Star. What is Columbia caring about and what are they consuming? On our website, that's the best way to tell. But, we do, again, our Facebook, our Instagram search, we do get much farther than that. And we can certainly capitalize on those moments and benefit in some ways. But at the end of the day, the people that will hopefully subscribe or support us in some way are going to be the people that are local. And so that's still the focus area for our work.
Yeah. Are you doing, since you are a school, are there classes for understanding data? Because I feel like, look, you can dump data in front of anybody, right? But
Yeah.
knowing how to use it, how to dig in and filter it and get what's important, you just talked about filtering to really dig into who your
Mhm.
Columbia, your local audience is. Are there classes of now?
Yeah. So the audience strategy class, analytics are a big piece of that. Understanding them, using them to test things, see what works and what doesn't. And then there's also, like, I encourage students that are on that path to also take some of the data classes that are maybe more focused on reporting and you're getting data from a government entity or something,
Yeah.
but like knowing how to work in a spreadsheet or run different analysis on data. Like, those are skills that apply regardless of what the data is. So you can use it for analytics, you can use it for, crime statistics. Like, those are tools in the toolbox. So we have many options in that direction as well.
Are there auditable classes for old people to take and learn how to do that? I feel like whenever I have to dig through data and spreadsheets, I also have another window open of, Google to, what are the
Yes,
tools
right.
to do this?
Yes.
How to,
There's a great weekend class that we do actually. They do it just over a weekend to really get their skills. It's a boot camp that works out well for them.
I have a friend that I graduated with. Well, he graduated. I didn't. But that he's great at that stuff, and I'm always just kind of in awe when I watch him go through stuff or he'll talk about it. I'm like, I don't know how to do that, or at least I don't know how to do that without Google next to it. Just
Yeah.
remind me of the tools and the processes.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times that I'm like, hey, I have this thing and I want to do this, and I need you to do that to a student. Like, I know that you, the student, can do this, and I'm going to tell you what I need, and you're going to be able to churn it out in a way faster than I would be able to figure out. So
Yeah.
they teach me too.
I want to talk more about classes because I've
Mhm.
asked this. I think of every time we've had a college, journalism school on here. I think it's the business side of news. I came up with, and I think a lot of people we've had on here are people that came up on the editorial side or still on the editorial side. I never once until I had to learned about the business side of news and how to run that organization. I got a little bit from one amazing publisher that I had that was a firm believer in everybody on staff should know everything. So he gave me a little bit of insight to it. But until I had to do this, until I started my own
Mhm.
thing, I knew nothing really about it. Are we doing more in the education side of things to prepare them for that? Because we're seeing so many more new organizations start up.
Yes. So one of the classes I mentioned, the community journalism class, that class is where I am talking about what's happening in local news and these and startups, nonprofits, weeklies that have figured out how to really tap into their communities and serve them well, and be successful. And we talk about a whole range of like business models of how some places do it, other ways they might do it, what like what the original model was. There's a book we read that kind of looks at the what they call the Goldilocks newspapers that are really struggling in a lot of cases. Of they had this advertising model that stopped working with the internet, and so they had to readjust and think about reader revenue and how that plays in. But then who gets those, who gets access, what kind of limitations does that put on who gets informed by the news? So those are all discussions and conversations we're having. But I literally, like, I do a class where I'm like, this is how the Missourian makes money and doesn't. Like where we're, like where we could grow, where we could get better. And then there are other classes even, that go even bigger, of business models kind of more broadly that are looking at, outside of, local. I'm mostly focused on digital and newspapers in my class, but this one looks more at like radio, TV, even talking to like the strategic communication, businesses out there. So how all of those models work. So in my class, though, they do a case study where they focus in and look at a local or community news outlet. And it's both what is their editorial strategy? What are they covering? What's working for them? But it's also, how does their business work? And what are they doing? How do they make money? And is it working? Is it not? And so those are things that they really have to dive into, ask questions. They have to be informed enough to ask the right questions, of course, when they're interviewing people for those case studies. But I do think that it empowers them, gives them much better understanding so that when they go into a newsroom, they understand why they're being asked to say, hey, subscribe to read my story, various things that are now that I don't think the wall is as high anymore, that there is much more conversation with the newsroom about the business side. When I first came out, I went to a paper that was owned by Knight Ridder. And it sold to McClatchy in the first 6 months that I was there. And so there was like this like great lesson to me and how corporate works and profit margins and what we
Right.
are and aren't able to do and that kind of thing. So I got a like just crash course in that because I'm like, where is my job safe? But but I think that it's important, like our students shouldn't go out clueless about that stuff. Um, One of our alums from many years ago was like, yeah, I went to this paper and I was like, well, why can't we do this? And they're like, corporate says no. And she's like, I didn't know what that meant. And I'm like, yeah, no one should go out anymore without that understanding of the ownership structure that they're going into, and kind of how the business works. And it's been interesting because I see students now, um, weighing those things. Where do I want to go work? What kind of company do I want to be in? And what is their mission? How do I fit into that? So they are going to a lot of the state's newsrooms. I just saw one of our May grads is joining, the Tulsa News Initiative that's
Oh, new
just
finish. Oh, yeah.
getting started. Um, so they are thinking about these things. It's not that they're like just saying, no, I'll never go work for, this chain or anything. They're not saying that at all, but they are weighing all of those things when they
Mhm.
look at jobs and at the companies and if the values line up with what their values are. So I do think that's something that they are much more cognizant of than I was when I graduated. And so that's something that I think has been important as we kind of continue to grow the curriculum, but making sure they're not coming out without that understanding of the business side. And we see them like, it's been interesting. We have a media sales class. So some of our editorials, like journalism students, will take that class, get to sell some ads for the newspaper.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
yeah. So they get a little taste of it, you know? Um,
That's awesome because I still hate it, and I have to do it,
yeah.
and I have somebody now that helps out with that. But yeah, I mean, like to learn it early instead of
Yeah.
as an old is so much better.
Well, I'll
I'm
say
still
so.
scared.
One of the things when I was at my first newspaper, then there was something, the press broke down, whatever, the papers weren't ready when the carriers were there, and we had to get the paper out. And so they just grabbed all the people working in the newsroom that day and they're like, all right, go like roll your papers, bag them, and then here's your list of subscribers and go deliver these papers. And that was the hardest job I've ever done. Like it was, which I learned later that when you're an actual carrier, you get like back then it was on a cassette tape, right?
Right.
It was like turn here, this house, do this. And they literally just gave me a list of like streets alphabetically, and I was like, I have no idea where I am. Um, but understanding all the different jobs does matter. Like, yes, the worker carriers do really is tough. And when we send students out, I love when they go to an internship and they're like, oh yeah, it was my day to go do the inserts and then go help drop at the different rack locations or whatever. I'm like, it's good for you to see those things.
Yes.
And get outside of the bubble of just producing the news.
Yeah, that is a great lesson, and that goes back to I mentioned the publisher I had that was like you need to know every part of our organization and how it all plays together instead of the constant usually we would always get a new job and it's just editorial versus the world.
Yes,
Right.
yes, right. Yeah.
Business side was the ivory tower, we were the poor people that you just but I think it's great to know how it all interplays, and it helps you produce the news, right? Because
Hmm.
you better know how to package it because you know how it's reaching your audience,
Yep.
what it takes to let you do that job, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's really really important. And I think not just the other part of that too is we talked about startups, but our most recent guest, Ale Sharpton, has built a career as a freelance journalist
Hmm.
and to learn how to brand yourself, how to market yourself, and
Hmm.
you are your own business at that point, and how to make a
Yeah.
career of it. And he's done it for a couple decades now. So
Right.
and that is a path, whether you want to or you need to, for
Hmm.
journalists as they move into their professional careers, to know that you can and to know how.
Yes. And I think that we have done a better job of informing students on that path in the photojournalism area because that is
All
very,
these
very
guys, yeah,
common. I
yeah,
mean, almost every, I mean, there's just not that many newsrooms hiring photographers. It's so heavily freelance. And so there is kind of a course in there path that teaches those, and I think we need to expand that and make sure that our reporters are getting that lesson as well, and even our audience. I mean, there's lots of consulting, there's different things that
Mhm.
students can do with these skills and build their own business to do it.
Right. Well, and that leads me to a question because you just said how it is a path for a lot of photojournalists now. I'm wondering the flip side because as we train new reporters, we're going to use that as the example. We train them to do everything, and that includes grabbing these out of their pocket, taking photos, taking video, recording audio, writing, all of the things. Do freelance photojournalists have to also say, "Oh, I can do a little everything"?
I think a little bit. I mean, you've got to show that you can come back with like all your captions correct, that they're styled correctly, that you can give the context of what event you were at. You can't assume that that a reporter is there as well. So our photographers go out, and they are often, turning something and writing 300 words to go with the photo package. So yeah, they have to do both things, I think. And the accuracy too, like,
Right.
if they're getting it wrong, then I'm going back to them too and saying, hey, you have to check this. Like, you can't just, go with your guess of your notes, like ask it back, right? um but then, our photojournalists, like, they have projects over the course of the semester that they're building a microdoc. So the 3 to 5 minute video that really tells a really good story, or their photo story. We're about to launch kind of they've been the semester long project that the class worked on. We have all the pieces ready. We're about to kind of spread out over the summer. And those are things they did all on their own. They found the sources, they were doing the interviews, they were asking the questions, and they were doing the writing alongside the video and the photography. So yes, I would say.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want to be a little cognizant of everybody's time here, so we'll kind of wrap up. And so at the end, let's just talk Mizzou for a little bit. Tell me just a couple quick questions here at the end. What do you absolutely love about your School of Journalism program, and that makes it the best for student journalists?
It's the hands-on work. It's the Missouri method. They come in here and they do the work. You're taking a class in reporting, you are the reporter. You take the photography class, you are the photographer. And it's in real life, and there's real consequences when you're wrong, but there's real praise from the community when you're right and when you have done a good job. And so they see that in real time. And oh, sorry. They see that in real time and get that experience right off, the bat. So that Missouri method, learn by doing, is the cornerstone of everything we do. So anytime we're talking about something, it's like, okay, how does this improve student learning? Give them a chance to be involved in this experience. We hold events. We have an event class that puts on the event. Like, there's, I mean, so many layers to what we do that plays into this, that we utilize that learn by doing method.
I love that you're including events, because I feel like, back to the business side of things, I feel like that's such a good way for revenue
Mm-hmm.
for news organizations, is to do those kind of community and marketing
Yeah.
events. Like, it has to be in your toolbox to
Mm-hmm.
to keep your org going. What would you love to add? As you look into the future, what would you love to add to the journalism program? This way we can put a little pressure on your bosses.
um, Gosh. I mean, sometimes I just feel like there's not enough time for them to do it all. You get students in here and you're like, oh, you could do this, and then you could do this. So there's some of that of like, okay, I need a little bit longer. But I do think that,
Is there a focus, or a thing, like, look, you're adding social media stuff now, right? Like, you're really focused on that.
yeah.
Do you see it and something in the future that you think we?
Yes, now I have a better answer. So one of the areas that we're talking about, and this is kind of an industry conversation and a lot of things going on, is around product and like product strategy, how you're packaging stuff, how you're putting that out to your audience. And that's like another whole layer of jobs in the industry, that we need to think about how students go through our curriculum to get the right skills for that. Now, a lot of them come out and they're going into those jobs and just like, they've mashed enough things together that they feel like they were qualified for these, or the employers did. But I think we're trying to make a more straight, clear path of that. So who are the people, basically becoming the people that say, okay, you have this content, let's package it in a newsletter, and that newsletter we can go to this place and get a sponsorship. We can do this thing to get subscribers, like thinking about all the pieces and how it all comes together, to improve on both the business side and get the content out to the right audience. So that audience strategy path is like step one. And then I think the next step is like, okay, let's think more in that product mindset and what that strategy is.
Awesome. I like that. And as somebody who spent a lot of time in print design, I like that we're still talking about how we package and how we put the things together and to our audience. Last thing here, and I'm trying to do a better job of finishing interviews with this because I just feel like I want to be more positive. What excites you about the future of the industry when you watch these students getting prepared, learning new things, and you see them graduate, you see them move on? What excites you about the future?
Well, I would say the work I do and the conversations I get to have with people in local news that are either like figuring out their like legacy product or doing a startup and just passionate about their community and serving that community with journalism excites me. And so when I get to see students catch that bug and want to go do that either in the community they're from or in a new community, but like that maybe was different than what they might have thought, that they thought they'd go to New York or whatever, but then they're like, actually I'm going to go work in this smaller community and get the opportunity to cover this and make a difference in this community. There's plenty of journalists over here in New York and Washington. I can go make a real difference in a smaller place. So when they catch that bug, it's really cool. I had a student that took my class in the fall and emailed me this spring and took a job at a weekly newspaper. And she said, I did it because I took your class and I was like, this is exciting. I want to be in this space and serve a community in this way. And so seeing that come out from those conversations with the people that are doing the work. I mean, I have a ton of guest speakers in that class. So their excitement spreads to the students and I get to see that play out. That's very exciting to me.
I love that when you see them catch the bug. That was what you
Yeah.
said. I love that it's true, and I like too that some of them are seeing. I'm a huge proponent of community news, community journalism. I think it's vital to be telling those local stories, right? Recording that history. Yeah. I'm gonna go back to a cliche like we started with, right? Like journalists are the first draft of history. I think we've lost that in some places, or we've even lost that drive. And so I think teaching the next generation to take that pretty seriously, that it's not just a funny cliche, that it's real and it's a responsibility. So I love that. That is awesome. Well, Elizabeth, thanks so much for giving us some time today and telling us about the Mizzou School of Journalism and what our next generation is going to look like. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
That'll wrap us up for this episode. We'll talk to everybody next time. The News Nirvana podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or most any of your favorite podcast apps. The News Nirvana podcast is made possible by the generosity of Blocks Digital. Connect with them at blocksdigital.com. The News Nirvana podcast is produced by Fredcasts. Think, speak, act,